Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bhartiya, and we are here at KubeCon and Con here in London. And we have with us once again my favorite Kelsey Hightower. Kelsey, first of all, it's great to have you on the show.
Awesome. Happy to be back.
You retire, right? So last time also we talked about your personal life. So how is retirement treating you, or how you are treating retirement?
I'm retired, not tired, right? So that doesn't, not having a 9 to 5 doesn't mean you don't do anything. You just kind of pick and choose what you want to work on. So for me, it's advising, friends that happen to be founders. People still want to hear my thoughts on things, so still public speaking. But for the most part, I get to just observe what's happening. I don't necessarily have to be directly involved as much as I used to.
When you were at Google, Kubernetes, you also played a very big role in getting people comfortable with Kubernetes because Kubernetes was a complicated, complex thing. Uh, when I look at Kubernetes back then, and when I used to talk to Brendan and all those folks, they want it to be boring. They don't want people to talk about it. I thought that one time KubeCon will become like LinuxCon, only hardcore developers will be there. But look at the crowd; it continues to grow. What is
Yeah,
driving this?
I think I stopped thinking about Kubernetes 5 years ago, right? I focused on things like serverless and observability. When you walk around an event like this, it's not just Kubernetes, right? A lot of people are doing everything from security to observability, configuration management. So I think Kubernetes may have been the anchor, but most people just kind of re-platformed on top. So I think there's less people that are like maybe new to Kubernetes, of course, than 10 years ago. But I think now the whole cloud native movement has found itself in all aspects of platform engineering. So I think it's more about platform engineering continues to grow, and Kubernetes just happens to be one of the foundational pieces.
Just like Linux kernel, that has become foundational piece, but people are building things on top of that.
100%.
Yeah. So you're saying that you advise your friends and you do. So what are the core of those discussion nowadays?
I think for all VC funded startups, they have to come to the realization, especially in the world of open source. I think a lot of people set out to build good technology, maybe even good products. But I don't know if everyone's really in the software business. That's very different. That is enterprise sales motions, procurement, marketing. And I don't think a lot of technologists realize that to make the pivot from this is a really cool open source project with a lot of GitHub stars to business, these aren't necessarily the same things at all. So I think a lot of the advisory work is that how do you go from project to product? And for a lot of people, that's a big shift because you actually have to talk to customers. You can't just put up a pricing page and hopefully they'll come and figure out what to do next. They need support, probably professional services. These are pretty hefty projects that require integration work. And so a lot of the work is really a maturity, meeting them where they are and then moving them up the maturity curve so they can actually understand what it's like to be in the software business and not just cool project.
And since you mentioned open source, what happened? I've seen with a lot of company. I don't want to name any company. This the founders of those companies, they have that vision. But as the company grow, as more people come in, CEOs are replaced. They sometimes forget the root of how and why they started the company. How do you advise folks if you are going open source route, go this route, or just go proprietary route altogether?
No, you will forget your roots because you will have to. Business is like giving away software for free. It's not the root of business. You will be out of business, guaranteed. So I think, like, how do you get started? 0 to 1 is very different from 1 to 100. So 0 to 1, there is an advantage to having something that's freely accessible in terms of price. Maybe open source is the right way to get started. Like, why would someone want to use your project when there's a million other projects that already exist? So if you have a price tag for a very immature thing that's just starting out, I'm not paying full price for an alpha. So I think the challenge is open source is a great way to raise awareness, get mind share, build a community around it. Very low friction. All the source code is available. Hell, you can come help out. So in the early stages, 0 to 1, open source makes a lot of sense. You just have to be clear that that is not sustainable. So going forward, I can't give the whole thing away for free and hire people to do support documentation. The math just doesn't work. We keep giving this away for free forever. It means you're going to go out of business. I think over time, that business reality sets in. And so now if you don't start off with a pricing page, you have to add one. If you don't have a marketing team, you will add one. So I think it's not really them getting away from their roots. It's just that their roots only got them so far. And now they have to go to the next stage. And so sometimes you'll see the CEO get cycled out, maybe for someone that can go from 1 to 100, but that same CEO probably wasn't the right person to go from 0 to 1.
But there are cases where companies totally abandoned their open source community by changing the license. So what you're saying is the trajectory, that open source and business, like Red Hat model is established model, SUSE model is established model. We can say canonical model is also established model. I don't want to name any companies, you know who I'm talking about. How to avoid that pothole?
To think that no company will ever evolve based on the current situation is kind of insane. So let's say your software was free and people could pay for enterprise features, and you did that for 10 years. Great. Year 11 comes and a competitor takes your free thing and offers more features than you or a managed service. So what do you got to do? You got to do something different. You can't say, well, we can't abandon our roots. We're just going to go out of business so we can remain pure. It doesn't work. In business, you're going to have to make decisions when you hit that crossroad. And you can imagine the empathy involved. If you are an employee or you're employing 1,000 people, they rely on you to make good business decisions so that revenue flows in. And so when you get to this crossroad a decade later, you're going to be forced to figure out, how do I make people pay for something? One avenue is to stop giving away value. And I think that's really hard to do after 10 years. If I've given away 98% of the product and there's only 2% enterprise features, either I have to have a lot more new features that require payment, or I may have to do weird things like redo the license. I think going forward, everyone has kind of a good understanding. Don't give away the whole product ever. And I think what that means for new open source companies is maybe the software or the source code is open, but maybe the release binaries are not open. You got to download those from my website. Maybe you have to give me your email address in the beginning, but maybe new versions are going to require payment. And you separate the product and the project. And I think we just learned now, right? So now that we all know better, maybe we have to do that to be a little bit more clear about the commercial relationship to the open source project.
Yeah, I remember Eric wrote the cathedral and the bazaar, we tend to forget those things. If we remember that, the things will not be. Now, I want to change the topic and I want to talk about something hot and not hot, which is AI, we had this discussion, brief discussion. What are your thoughts on where we are heading with AI in general?
I've had this discussion a lot in the last 6 months, and I think it does boil down to how you see yourself. If you see yourself as an employee that is measured on metrics, how many emails you process, how many sales leads you close, how much source code you write. So if that's how you see yourself in the mirror, then you will look at the machine as an equivalent. You will look at this thing as a partner. You will look at this thing as a replacement. And because you're only limiting yourself to what a machine can do, right? So for some people, that's what they've been doing for the last 15 years. They're just a person operating the computer, and they have never done anything more than the computer will allow them to do. So for me, when I think about software development, it starts before you touch the keyboard. Creativity, whiteboard sessions, design. You're watching how people work. You're observing the world. Then you build. But some people don't have that flow. They just sit behind the desk, get assigned a task, and then they become one with the machine. So if that's your viewpoint, you look at AI as like a replica of yourself. If you see yourself as more than what happens on a machine, then your views will be different. So for me, I'm like, wow, people are very excited about artificial intelligence. What would it look like if we pour $1 trillion into real intelligence, real people, right? You see a lot of people saying, oh, it's going to require all of this power to feed the machines. We got to give them all this data so the machine models don't starve. But you say, well, what about like people? There are people that don't have enough power. There are people that don't have enough food to eat. And so it's kind of weird where artificial intelligence gets the spotlight when the people who create the actual data set that feeds the machine, which is normal people doing creative things, and all their actions become data sets that feed into the models. Sure, these things will create maybe new things, but if, in my mind, anything that a machine could do is because we taught it. And so to me, I'm the type of person that sees humanity as something more than a person who operates a machine or who wants to live their life behind a screen. And so there are parts of AI that I think are going to be amazing. For example, when it comes to like elderly care, this is like someone who's maybe later stage of life. They may have dementia. They don't even recognize their family anymore. So you can imagine how hard it is when a family member tries to assist them 24/7. That means they're going to have to give up a portion of their lives to sit with them and be with them around the clock because they do need someone there. And so when people start talking about humanoid robots in that use case, that makes a lot of sense for me, where how do we give people quality care around the clock in the way that allows everyone around them to also live their lives? So that's one where I would say, look, I step back and say that might be a net benefit. That is a good use of technology to fill a very painful gap that we haven't solved completely. But the idea that we use the same AI to do all the creative stuff, to write the music, to make the movies, maybe we can reserve something for the humans to do as well. But more practical, when I look at the low-level technologies, things like MCP, where we give our tools semantic meaning, we give them a description, and in some ways, that level of description makes it easier for humans to realize and discover what's available. But then it allows an LLM to do more than just generate content. Maybe it allows the LLM to start operating our tools for us. So in some regards, it's a really nice automation framework that gives us a new way of interacting with our existing tools. And as someone who's seen technology evolve over time, I kind of welcome that next step. And then it's on us to see what we can do with it.
I mean, if you look at the whole industrialization, the same thing, same fear was that it will replace human. There are a lot of conflict between machine versus human labor. But then if you just look at there are a lot of industries, there are a lot of jobs which are risky for our lives. Why should a person risk their life to do the job when the machine can do it safely? But so I think but are you seeing that right now, the way every company, everybody is obsessed with AI to just get into it is a temporary phase? Over a period of time, we will realize that no, it is a tool, not a replacement, or you see it as existential threat to humanity in general.
It's going to be up to people to decide. Some people, I remember when Apple launched the screen time app. What makes someone want to write an app to track how much screen time? Maybe you get to a point where the tool in our pocket became an addiction. And some people don't even want to talk to anyone else. They just want to, even in the same room, they want to text the person instead of making eye contact. So it's very clear that technology always has that potential to be just a tool that we reserve for use when we need it, or it can become an addiction. And I think when you look at things like social media, mobile devices, the risk for people to overconsume is really high. And so when you think about AI in this particular case, we're literally personifying the technology. We are referring to these things as like reasoning, right? What happens when they become emotional, right? Like, what if we can't discern the difference? And then also, why are people pushing for that? So if that's where some people are pushing it, what happens when they get there? And I think that's just a thing that humans are just going to have to ask themselves, just because we can, should we?
There was some study also a couple of weeks ago I read, that people who rely on, these, chat GPTs and they're getting emotionally attached. There was a movie also, Her, if you remember, that Walking Phoenix got attached. They're like, people who use it for emotional, because people treat them as a friend, chat, you just sit on there and chat, and that can be, and I mean, I have two kids and I worry because they're addicted to their phones. They're on the Pokemon Go versus actually interacting with the world. So yes, you're absolutely right that the fear is there. We don't know how things will shape up, but we will see. The time will tell. You and I cannot right now decide. If we just get out of open source technology, what keeps you excited? Whether it's technology or people, if it's technology, what is the next thing after Kubernetes or platform engineer, as you mentioned, is keeping Kelsey excited? Hey, this is what I'm looking for the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, the only thing I'm looking for the next 5 to 10 years is peace. I don't need to be excited anymore. I do get excited from time to time, but I don't need to be excited. I'm at the point now where it's like, if you can tell me that I'm going to have peace in 5 to 10 years, that's exciting. Because in order to get peace, that means people have to be reasonable. That means we have to use the technology responsibly. We have to consider others. And so in that world, you can have peace. And then if you want to get excited about something, you can always jump into a piece of technology and build something, add new features, fix bugs. That will hopefully always be an option. But the thing that makes me excited the most is when people can find like peace. Peace for me is like, I retired, everyone hits their number. You walk away from the daily grind of a 9 to 5, worrying about the stock price, worrying about the feature set. And so to be able to walk away from that and then observe technology without those kind of pressures, that is pretty peaceful. I can look at the technology in a certain way. No one has to win. I don't care if this one wins or that one wins. I can just enjoy the game. It's almost just like watching the championship game, and I'm not necessarily rooting for any team. I can just enjoy the match. That means I can watch the game peacefully. If you pick a team and that team isn't winning, it's very stressful to watch that game. So when I say peace, it's one of these things where peace requires balance. And so for me, having the option to choose who I work with, choose not to work at all, that's a really great place to be. And so the more people who get to experience that, that's super exciting because a lot would have to happen in order for that to exist.
So when people look at Kelsey, people always rate you as a technologist. If you look at today, are you a humanist or technologist, or who are you?
I don't know. I just try to be honest. I try to be real. You try to be transparent. The good thing is I don't have to be anything, right? And so I think now it's just more of, most people meet me and I just explain the journey, but they want the nuance. How did you feel in a scenario where you were unsure? How did you feel when you took a 2-month vacation and you wasn't sure if you would come back to be irrelevant because you were gone too long? How do you feel when the technology you bet on is no longer the top thing anymore? And so it's that nuance where people just want guideposts. They just want someone to talk to about those things. So I would say I'm trying to maybe heading towards philosopher. If you get good at anything long enough, you can observe it in different ways. You find different ways to articulate it. And then you form your own philosophy. So these days, the technologist evolves into the philosopher. And then you try to get people, maybe if you have it yourself, you can share that wisdom with other people.
I remember early time when I used to talk to you, you used to call yourself minimalist.
I am a minimalist still.
So I think that your philosophy toward minimalism is not just about your house, but I think towards the life itself. And if you can share that vision, what minimalism mean, not just, I have less furniture in the house, but what does it mean for life?
For example, you see the AI wave is very exciting. And you can try to do what everyone else does. You can follow all the new model releases. You can download them all. You can try Cursor, you try this one. You don't want to miss anything. So you're just all over the place, right? You even have alerts. Whenever something comes out in AI news, you want to subscribe to everything. You watch all the channels. You don't want to miss nothing. As a minimalist, I'm more intentional. I would be way more intentional. I would say for my life and my lifestyle, what part of this tool makes sense for me? There are problems I don't want to have, right? So if you show me some AI that organizes your email because you have so much email, I don't want that problem. So I'm not interested in AI that organizes email better because I never want to have that problem. So it's living with intentionality. I don't want to find a use for a tool that I don't need. So it's more like that. So I look at it. And so when I say intentionality, I look at all the people building great things and say, wow, what would this be the most useful in society? I have parents that will be aging. Will this be helpful for them? How? How could I leverage it? How can I influence it? And so then it helps me guide my attention. You know what? Maybe I pay attention to this part. Maybe I pay attention to this part. And I'm also one of those people that says, look, I don't understand it. I think I maybe understand a lot more than I did last year. And so when I talk to people, I ask them, do you know how it works? And most people in this space, they know how certain layers work, but maybe not the next layer. Then I go search for the next person. Do you understand how this layer works? Write it down for me. Because I do think what's going to be very important during this time phrase is that who adds a window to the black box? A lot of the fear, a lot of the analysis is literally based on lack of understanding. So we're all just making things up. We're repeating things we don't know if true or not. And then that just kind of maybe fuels the hype cycle a little bit more. But I'm one of those people who's like, hey, I'd rather think about this stuff from a position of understanding than fear or confusion.
Once again, Excellent. I will drag you back to the tech word because, when we talk about all this AI, Gen AI, I mean, the fact is that it's very resource. I mean, I can run it on my laptop also, but not at that level. I can write a chapter on it myself. And when we look at hyperscaler, when we talk about open source, are you seeing, I mean, DeepSeek was there, open source, where these things will become more democratized, not too much tied to resource hungry, power hungry technologies?
They'll get better. People will figure out better ways of doing it. Maybe they become the baseline become like a little library you use to give your app natural language processing. Maybe it's something you use to generate support commentary on a ticket. Technology tends to do that. When we figure out how to do something, people will move around and share that knowledge and create competition. That's just the normal flywheel of innovation. There's no way one company is just going to dominate forever. You may enjoy a 3 to 6 month lead, but forever, I don't know about that. I think now it comes down to what role do you want to play in all of this? As an observer, when the tools get mature, I'll use them as necessary. But I think as someone that's standing back and just watching other people surf the wave, I'm happy to sit this one out for now. Yeah, I don't feel like I need to be fully ingrained in this like I was with Kubernetes. I need to pick and choose the waves that I want to surf. And when I tell people this, they get a little amazed, like, hey, this is the biggest wave ever. It's like, are you sure about that? There's waves in medical science right now. We're curing some diseases that people thought they would never have a cure for. There's breakthroughs in energy right now. There's all kind of things happening around the world. So most people don't surf all the waves either. They ignore most of them. And so for me, this is part about being intentional. My intentionality looks at this AI wave and say, you know what? I'm going to let this one settle down a little bit, see what comes out of it, and I just stick to the fundamentals. It's the thing underneath the AI changing. For example, someone will say, hey, Kelsey, this is cool AI thing we're using to drive Kubernetes. I was like, could you show it to me? It's like, great, you can now chat and ask Kubernetes to deploy an app for you. I said, okay, I guess that's pretty cool, but it's still Kubernetes. Like, yes. Can I see what it generates? Yeah, it looks like the thing that I still understand. So the fundamentals aren't changing here. It's like, no, we're using a new tool to drive the fundamentals. I feel safe in that. So the way I look at it is the way people get excited about the new models, I get excited about my own model. When I'm learning new things, I'm improving my own mental model. If I learn how to cook a new dish instead of buying it from a restaurant, I've improved my own capabilities. When I learn a piece of new technology, I improve my own capabilities. So imagine if people walked around and thought about their own unique one-of-one model. You have a context of the world, you have your own worldview. At this very moment, we're pulling in new training data and we're deciding, do we retrain ourselves and become a different person over time? So I'm looking at this time period as like, man, maybe I should approach the same intentionality that maybe a company like OpenAI is doing for their model to my own. So now I'm like being more aware of the things that I'm putting into my mindset. And then I'm taking notes a little bit more and I'm asking myself, like, did I improve? So that's the way I look at it now. It's like, hey, artificial intelligence, I don't think there's anything wrong with real intelligence and I can improve my model. And I can't remember everything, so there's nothing wrong with reaching for a calculator from time to time.
And yeah, I mean, since the birth, not just human, every animals, we have our own training data. I mean, they're hardwired right from the very beginning, and we evolve. And that's why we read. That's why we watch. Now we are more in the consumption phase, not in the learning phase. We don't read books anymore that we used to earlier anyway. So when I look at it, I think you are becoming less of an engaged, but more of an observer.
Yeah, I think I was always an observer. When I used to build things, it comes after the observation. I'm not just building. I'm observing the world and deciding to create based on that inspiration. Or I see a need, then I build. And so whenever I got involved in any piece of technology, it was based on how I observed the world. Some people will say, they'll ask me a question, I want to get involved in an open source project. I'm like, why? So I can make a name for myself, so I can get credibility. It's like, well, okay, I don't know if that's sustainable. I tend to get involved when I have a need. If I run into a bug or I think something should exist in the world, that's when I jump into technology mode, but not before. So I usually try to identify what the real need, and then I go in. So I've always been an observer. This is why I think I like startup advisory work. So as the observer, where do you put your observations? Do you just keep them to yourself? Do you put them in a book? Or do you advise other people to maybe see a part of the world that they haven't had time to observe themselves?
And then observing also plays into the learning, phase, training model, because the more you observe, the more data you get. When we look at your worldview, your approach towards life, are you working on a book or something like that to encapsulate everything to further share? I mean, you don't have shared too much what is in the pipeline, but I would love to know that.
I think these days, when I am booked for keynotes, I don't do as many live demos anymore.
Yeah. They were fun. They used to be fun.
They're fun, but I also evolve.
Yeah.
And these days, there's a lot more storytelling and Q&A. And that has been the best catalyst for these ideas, right? Because a real person in the audience asks a real question. And you can look at them and you give them a snapshot of where you are at that moment in time. And so I get to give them a very detailed answer with all the nuance. I'm very patient with the answers. And I think this is where people are getting that philosophy. And then there's this feedback loop. After you give that talk, people may come up to you and challenge the idea. People may rephrase the question to see if they can get a little deeper. And even in those moments, I'm rethinking my view of the world. Maybe I'm missing something. For example, I was a deep AI skeptic. And then someone said, well, what about elderly care? I was like, you know what? I haven't thought about it that way. I'm thinking, like, I don't want a robot walking next to me washing my dishes. I can do that myself. But what about someone that can't do that? And so then I'm now recalculating my own worldview. So I think that's the form I've enjoyed the most. Long form podcasts, keynotes where we get to explore that stuff. So that's been my best. And maybe one day there'll be another book. But as you know, writing books aren't simple. So I kind of like this stream of consciousness for now.
I think what you're saying is not just applicable to the tech world. If we just listen and talk, a lot of political problems is also be solved. I mean, what you're saying is not, is universal. How much does this word bothers you that we are living in today? Because since you are talking stream of consciousness, I mean, I used to be a literature student. I used to read Nietzsche, Kafka. So I feel like, a vibe here. So what do you think of the word that we are laying into? Are you worried? Are you like, no, it will take care of itself? Or you're like, no, we might have to do something?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the way I watch people, the way they talk about life, the way they talk about their neighbors, the way they talk about fellow citizens, I always wonder, like, why don't they take the time just to ask the question, why do I believe what I believe? Just that moment of pause. I mean, today it's so easy to find a book, a podcast, a video that agrees with you. And so in many ways, you can walk around believing that you're absolutely right about everything because there's something to confirm that bias. And I just asked myself, I was like, man, when do you stop and pause for a second and like, why do I believe this? And then the next follow-up question for me is, why do I need this to be true? And a lot of times there's some fear element you have and you go look for statistics to confirm your fear. And then you ask yourself, like, why do you need that to be true? And that's the things that I wish people took more time to do. Challenge, like, why do they believe that? Because you're shaped by the things around you. And I think people don't really give enough credit to how much they're being influenced. And so it's like, are you talking or are you just repeating someone else's belief? And so that to me is the only thing that I'm worried about. Because I think at that moment, once you become a reasonable person, once you're willing to have this type of rational, critical thinking, then we can deal with tough issues. We're never going to agree on everything. And so having the right answer is never going to be a satisfactory thing for everyone. I think what's required when we don't agree is I need to understand the reasoning. I need to be able to take critical thinking. For example, we're not going to settle a dispute in one conversation always. And what you hope people can find the ability to do is question something, be unsure, go think about it a little bit, go travel, right? If you're scared of people from a particular country, sometimes the best thing for you to do is to fly there, get the experience, talk to people, try the food, watch their TV, get to know some people, then come back to that particular bias and say, yeah, do I still feel the same way? And if not, what changed? What put me in that mind state? What moved me away from it? This is critical thinking. it's not fast. You can't solve these type of things super quick. And so for me, is that's the thing that I think is missing, where people are like, oh, I don't like this person. You say, okay, that's an initial reaction. Like you'll hear a song. I've heard songs for the first time. I'm like, I don't think I like this song. And then I read the lyrics. Or I hear the same song at a party. And then the way everyone moves or responds to the song builds a different connection between me and the song. And then I go back to listen to the song and it feels like a whole different song. Or if I get to know the artist, like, wow, they wrote this song during the civil rights movement. So these lyrics mean something totally different. And so now this song becomes a checkpoint in history and not just something trying to be number one on the Billboard. And so, but it's that critical thinking that worries me, where some people don't think it's important. So like the attack on education, the fear of like just being an intellectual, not the situation where you look down on people, but just as a framework for critical thoughts. That's it. Not right or wrong, but the ability to think critically about what you believe and being opened up to moving to a new goalpost once you redefine things.
Kelsey, once again, thank you so much for taking time out. It's always a pleasure to sit down and talk to you, because as you said, I look at you once again. I don't want to say, because I've come from India like a saint, who has become a sage, who has evolved, attained nirvana in a way. And this is what we need to do in today's fast-paced world. I was watching a writer, a philosopher. He was like, back in those days, we used to read books. We were slow. And he was also talking about that he's a writer. So he's like, we used to use words. These days, people say, you know what I mean? He said, no, I don't know what you mean. You have to use the word to say, but now we are just using reels. We are so fast, we don't use word to convey what we mean.
And when I hear someone say we used to read books, I think what they really mean is that we used to create space to learn something new.
Dedicate time for hours and
days. It takes
days.
time to read a book.
Yeah.
And I think creating space to sit down with something and saying, okay, I'm going to give myself the time and space to listen to a different point of view, complete the book, sit down with it and analyze it and try to figure out, does that move my worldview? I think today you want the quick take, right? I want the tweet, I like it or I don't like it, and then move on. Literally, you don't even analyze it. You just respond in real time, and then it rolls off your timeline, and you're off to the next thought. And it's like, what's the point of receiving all of this data if you're not going to process any of it?
No, very well said. And I do hope that people do pay attention to that. And I have faith in humanity. And I think at some point we will restore that. But for now, we are going through this transition point. Once again, Kelsey, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure. And I look forward to our next discussion. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.